There is no such thing as a motiveless murder. The motive may be lust, jealousy, greed, or envy, but there's always a motive. The first murder ever recorded, of course, was the murder of Cain killing his brother Abel. What was the motive? Jealousy. And as we discuss the four cases, I'm going to ask you to consider, what was the motive that drove those people into the dilemma of standing on trial in the dock for the most serious offense, the whole calendar of crime? They may not have been guilty in many of those cases, but the motive behind what they did would be the factor that a jury would consider. And interestingly enough, many people who stand trial for murder in the Crown Court with a jury are facing a trial for the first time in their lives, as they've not previously ever committed a criminal offense. And perhaps that's what makes murder so fascinating, because it could be you, ladies and gentlemen, standing in the dock. This is the story of a gentle Chinaman. And we're going back to the year 1925. Name was Ah-tam. And he came to this country at the turn of the last century from Canton, and soon settled in the area in which we are now talking. He became a leader of the Chinese community. He was a gifted man. Not only did he learn English very quickly, but also master the various dialects that come from China. This enormous talent was of great value because it allowed him to negotiate on behalf of the seamen coming from China to this country their contracts. And he soon became much respected by the shipping companies. He was a man that was trusted. He was gentle and kind. He became very successful, opened businesses, and used some of the money he made for the good of the Chinese community. And he opened a club in this area for seamen coming from China, having a place to go, a place to socialize. The Chinese community, as we all know, are a peace-loving, friendly community, and in it they could enjoy their own social activity in the club called the Chinese Progressive Club. One afternoon, a group of Russian seamen burst into the club. There was chaos, and a fray took place. And unfortunately, Ah-tam was hit savagely on the head with a billiard cue. He seemed to recover. We perhaps in those days didn't quite have the knowledge that we'd have today. And of course he should have gone for x-rays and the like. But he seemed to recover and he was taken home. We turn now to the year 1925, 8 years after this brutal attack upon Ah-tam. In those 8 years, there was a character change. This quiet gentleman became irascible and was taking refuge in alcohol. He'd previously been a quiet gentleman. And it's not hard to imagine that the character change had a direct link to the savage attack made on him 8 years previously. He was happily married, and he'd married a Welsh lady, and he had 3 children, 2 daughters, Doris and Cecilia, and a son, Ling. And he sent Ling across back to China for his education. And they lived in 122 Princes Street in Birkenhead in a very pleasant abode. Now the boy came home for his 21st birthday. Great celebration. They had a party and all seemed well. Everyone was jovial, everyone was happy. And Ah-tam was not drinking excessively. Party came to an end. And suddenly, he got into a fit of temper. Unreasonable temper. Actually, almost in the state of a fit. Her wife and daughters rushed upstairs to the bedroom, locked the door. And Ling felt help was required. He went next door. By the time he'd come back, Ah-tam had got possession of 2 revolvers, loaded, barged through the door into the bedroom, and shot his wife and 2 daughters dead. He then came downstairs, picked up the telephone, rang the police and said, "You folks had better come round here. I've just murdered my wife and 2 daughters." Of course, the police hastened, and he's taken into custody. You can imagine in the Chinese community the horror, the sadness, and the lack of understanding how this happened. But faithful to him and in gratitude to all the work he'd done for them, collections were brought about to obtain the services of the great Sir Edward Marshall Hall. Now, in those days, poor people weren't properly defended because there was no legal aid. And many good counsel would do it what's called pro bono, for nothing. But Marshall Hall was in much demand. And so they persuaded him to take the case. A great saviour of lost causes. But Marshall Hall had an immense problem. And the problem was that Ah-tam was clearly insane in the normal sense of the word at the time of this dreadful murder. But the rules of insanity were born in 1843. And one of the rules must be that the person didn't know what they were doing is wrong in law. And the fact that Ah-tam rang the police demonstrated that he knew it was wrong in law. And therefore, while insane in the normal sense of the word, he didn't come under the bracket of insanity in the law, what's known as the MacNaughton rules. Now, the difficulty at the trial in Chester Assizes was, despite all the immense work that Marshall Hall put into this case and all his oratorical skills, the judge had a duty to direct the jury that on the laws of insanity, if the person knew what they were doing was wrong in law, then the case for an insanity verdict would fall. And of course, Ah-tam had rung the police and therefore demonstrated that what he did, he knew was wrong in law. And therefore, the jury were only out less than half an hour and brought in a guilty verdict, and he was sentenced to death. Now it's worth going back, not all those years, but into the 1957 period. Because in 1957 came the Homicide Act, which brought in diminished responsibility, which put in simple terms as a halfway house between insanity and normality, where a person would be temporarily disturbed. And so, of course, if the Act had been in existence in 1926, beginning 1926, at the trial, Edward Marshall Hall would have pleaded diminished responsibility, which would have reduced the charge to manslaughter and allowed the judge discretion on sentence. But of course, in those days, we had capital punishment. And therefore, the judge had no alternative but to sentence this poor man to death. His body now lies within the prison walls at Walton, and he was hanged in March of 1926. Many, many people who look at this case feel there was a direct link between the savage attack on him in his club, beaten on the head, and his subsequent behavior ending up in this dreadful murder. It's a sad story, and the people of Liverpool have not forgotten it, and all praise would have to go to the Chinese people so loyally trying their best to save him in thanks for all the work he'd done for their community.